just speaking about the preconditions, the necessary preconditions for education. Not only to have materials in the language that people can understand, but in your case, you've also been working on a theological dictionary, if I'm not mistaken, because often we don't even have normalized names for people or places when we're not even talking about having books in the right language for the local people, but there's no agreed upon spelling, pronunciation, or term or characters to use for a lot of these topics, which leads to a whole host of other issues.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a challenge. Some of the most basic vocabulary. If it's in the Bible, if it's a word, it's in the Bible, or a phrase is in the Bible. There's one Bible translation almost everybody uses, and so those terms that show up in the Protestant Bible, that's pretty standardized. But once you get beyond that, then it can become tricky. I mean, certainly things like the word for Trinity, essence versus person, these kinds of things, there are well-established terms. But once you get off sort of basic theology, get into church history, get into some more of the finer details of theology, then it becomes kind of complicated. There's a lot of times that there isn't a single term that's being used. One of the biggest headaches is names of people in church history, because
that's in English too, Mike.
Well, in Western church, well, at least in the West, we all use the Latin alphabet, right? So,
fair enough.
Regardless
yes.
whether you're in French or Spanish or
right.
English or German, I mean, maybe there's a few funky little characters in some Eastern European, or you have Slavic languages, whatever. They have a different alphabet, but basically, you still can sort of the phonetics are close enough that you can pretty much just transliterate, character for character, and it's not hard to get something that's pretty close. I mean, it's not going to be too much variation, but when you go into Chinese, there's like a dozen characters that you could use for one particular sounds, because none of the they can't exactly make any of the sounds in English or French or German or whatever. And then of course, you have different pronunciations in whether you look at the Greek or the Latin or the English or some other language. So you have to decide, well, if we're going to sort of translate this by sound, well, which sound from what language?
Wow.
So you get all kinds of different variations of the same person or name, and then it's confusing people. I mean, it seems like something's very simple, but for just one example, the Nicene Creed. Okay, that's fairly standard, but actually there's one translation, Nicaea, which is based on the Greek word, because the Greek is not ni, it's ni, right? Nicaea. So then there's one older Chinese is that way, and then in mainland China, someone there that they tend to want to follow the English, and so it's not Nicaea, it's a Nicaea. Well, a ni and ni is totally different characters, and so people were asked the question, well, what's the difference between is a different creed than Nicaea and Nicaea? Are they two different things? And so it's confusing, and of course, that's the case with many different people's names in Chinese. And so it just becomes complicated and difficult. If you want to have a more advanced theological education that's consistent, you're going to have some sort of standardization of how you write these names and how you translate certain theological terms. Otherwise, it can be rather confusing.